My name's Brian Scrivener. I'm from Sound Advice Acoustics Limited. We're noise consultants based on the South Coast. And what I'd like to do, I'd just like to split this up. There's three sections that cover acoustics with the world standard. You've got the exterior noise, we've got internal noise, and then we've got the reverberation time. Bit of a blockbuster moment there. So, when we look at the exterior noise, this is primarily dealing with the traffic noise and the ambient noise that's emanating from outside and is propagating into the office space, the warehouse space, whatever it is that we're assessing. The standard obviously sets our bandwidth, which 20 hertz through to 20 kilohertz is normal human hearing. Now, obviously, that can depend on the age of the person. We also set an accuracy and a resolution level there. This then allows us to make sure that the noise meters that we're using are accurate and within certain parameters. So it means that you're using correct noise meters, so we're getting accurate and repeatable measurements. So the next stage then talks about the number of tests that are actually carried out. Now, obviously, again, this is dependent on the size of the area that we're testing and also the individual space itself. The sampling times, 30 seconds. This has been derived as a certain length of time which is acceptable, so that the sound pressure levels that we're recording have actually had a chance to settle down and that we're getting a good average across that time period. Obviously, as I say, with the larger spaces, the more measurements we take, the more accurate our assessment of that space becomes. Okay, this particular part looks at the number of hours and the HVAC system itself and what's generally operating within that time. It also looks at sound masking systems, which are quite are often present within modern offices now, where partitions are installed and the ceiling is not continuous across the top. There's quite often a sound transmission issue between offices, and sound masking systems are becoming commonplace, whereby we're raising the background noise level. Now, we spoke about this earlier today, about how the level of background noise, if we set the level too low, that actually this can interfere. So it's important for us to set levels that are relevant to the activity that's actually going on in that room at that time, be it a warehouse, an office, even toilet areas, corridors. They will have standards that need to be set to. Now, sound can obviously penetrate into rooms through lots of different ways. It's not just through the window or through a ventilation shaft. There's many, many different ways, as you can see from this diagram here. So it's important that when we're designing buildings, at the very early stage, at the onset, that we think about all the different ways that sound's going to get into this room and how we're going to prevent that. And that's important that acoustics are thought about at the very early design stage to ensure that once we get to the testing stage at the end, that we're not having problems that would be extremely expensive, difficult, and time-consuming to fix at the end of a project. So what sort of criteria could we be looking at? Well, this is taken from BS 8233, which sets internal criteria for various areas. We're also looking at the ranges up. Where's my pointy thing? Oh, that one, there we go, right, okay. So, we were talking earlier about the ranges. I think it's important for us not to set precise levels. I think it's important for us to set ranges of levels within different areas. Exactly what we were talking about earlier, different areas, different offices may have whilst they may be open plan office, You might have a particular open plan office that wants it very quiet, and you need to be able to concentrate. You may have open plan offices where you need to raise that background level. It's important for the operations of whoever's using that their operations need that higher noise level. So that needs to be considered at the design stage. So that's important. The World Health Organization has carried out a lot of research into both the mental and physical effects that sound can have on you when you're working. It's important for us to design an area that is appropriate for us. Lady over there mentioned a question regarding autism. Now, BB93 is the standard that we use for education areas, for schools and colleges, and that has a particular section in it that deals with for hearing impaired, and that sets stricter criteria for those hard of hearing. So again, that is something that we could introduce for these offices, warehouses, residential. If we know the tenants that are going in there, we can set stricter criteria to make sure that these things have been thought about from the off. So moving inside. Now we're inside and we're looking at the specific noise from the internal plant. So now we're dealing with all the M&E, all the air conditioning stuff, all the other bits of plant that are running with the building services, making sure that the noise levels that are generated from this are not creating too much noise and are not creating an environment that is not appropriate for the environment that you're sat in. So again, if you're in a warehouse, these criteria need to be set and we need to come up with appropriate standards to take this from. Again, the WELL standard is setting out particular criteria for the equipment and the measurement sampling periods. It's also set a 10% sampling rate, which is in line with building regulations approved document E, which sets out you only need to assess a certain percentage of a development, assuming that it's all constructed in the same manner. When we're dealing with internal levels, we're looking at the plant and looking at purely what's happening from that. Whilst we're recording that noise level, we're obviously getting influenced from noise levels externally. So it's imperative that we take additional measurements of background noise because these are all influential to it. If we're going to carry out a robust assessment, these need to be done with background measurements taken from that measurement to make sure that we've got the correct data. Now at the moment, the WELL standard is asking us to record noise levels in what we call the NC curves, the noise criteria curves. And these are American-based. In Europe, we use NR curves. And this is simply the noise level that we have to achieve below that certain NR curve for the operation of particular bits of plant. At the moment, there's about a 1 to 2 dB difference between NC curves and NR curves, and we would need to decide which we were going to use. We'd need to use one of them, so we'd need to decide whether we adopt the NC curves and use those, or whether we adopt the NR curves and generate our own set of criteria for the WELL standard. So, this is a very quick list of various rooms and standards and criteria that we could adopt. Now these are the NC curves. So it's up to us, do we adopt those or do we come up with an NR level of our own? The 2 dB, is it going to make a great deal of difference? It could do. It could mean a difference between something that's annoying, something that isn't. So again, that would need considering. Reverberation times. Now we're looking at the amount of absorption, the amount of acoustic panelling that we've got, type of carpet, all that sort of stuff. This looks at the decay time, as we've heard, from what we call the RT60, which is the 60 dB drop. All these measurements that we're talking about are already commonplace. We're already doing them. They're present within Building Regulations Approved Document E, sign-off for our residential. They're present within BRE certification. So what the well standard would do is bring all these measurements together and house them in one place. It would allow us to carry out assessments and make sure that the commercial premises are compliant with the standards that we set out. At the moment, if you were to build offices, there's actually, unless you're doing a BRE assessment, unless you've got planning conditions, unless you've got an employer's requirement, there's no actual requirement to test that commercial premises. Now, a planning condition would only relate to external noise. It's important that we look at the internal environment. That's what this well standard is about. By introducing this, we would make sure that the commercial premises are assessed properly and that we're making sure that the environments that the workers are in is acceptable and is to a level of a standard where it needs to be for their own personal comfort. Stairwells and corridors, quite often something that's overlooked. This does need to be considered. It's already considered within building regulations and it's already considered within residential areas. Stairwells and corridors looks at absorption rates. So slightly different from reverberation times, it looks at the absorption rate of the material for the ceilings. Why is this important? If you have a corridor and you have people walking down it, talking, chatting, the noise level in there without the appropriate treatment will just increase. That can affect sensitive offices next door. It can affect open plan offices. It can affect meeting rooms. So it is important to look at stairwells and corridors. But again, this all needs doing at the design stage. So here we have some proposed reverberation times. These are taken from BB 93, which is the criteria for schools and colleges and education units. These we could adopt, these we could use, and they would set acceptable standards for those areas. It's just another one there. What else would we need to consider? Sound insulation testing between offices. We've looked at noise breaking into the office. We've looked at the reverberation time. We've looked at the M&E plant. But what about the offices upstairs, or the offices downstairs, or the offices either side of a wall? We would need to consider the sound insulation values between these separating structures, set appropriate criteria to make sure that the environment that people are working in is acceptable. Ground-borne vibration. We're in a basement right now. There's probably underground trains going past fairly close to us, but we don't feel them because the ground-borne vibration has been thought about. Arabs obviously have their own acoustics division, so it would be a shame if we were feeling it. But again, ground-borne vibration needs considering. The standards that we've got at the moment. Quite often, building regulations, the new BB 93 that's out, looks at both new build and refurbishment. So the refurbishment of offices would need considering. Should we be setting standards that are more lenient? Because refurbing offices can often be, there's often restrictions there that you simply can't overcome. So do we need to be a bit more lenient for that? One last thing. Category A, Category B fit-outs. It's important that we have a set of parameters when it comes to completion testing at the end. We need to make sure that these environments are actually ready for testing. So often we turn up to site and the site simply isn't ready. So if a Cat A fit-out isn't complete with all its structures, it can't be tested. We don't get valid data. So it's important that the sites are finished. All these things would need to be considered. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brian. Can I don't want to delay things, but a point of clarification. You mentioned in your presentation about deciding around following NR versus NC. The bit I didn't get, and forgive me because I probably wasn't listening very clearly, who decides?
It's just been widely known amongst the sort of acoustic standards that NC curves are used in America. They're very. I've been doing the job 22 years. I've never used an NC curve because they're known to be from US.
Okay,
origin.
so we'd follow the NR.
We've always followed NR curves right across
and
Europe.
that decision, so it's default really. There's no decision to be made.
No, the decision we would need to make from adopting the well would be that if we adopted NR, if we were to use our NR levels, we would need to set our own criteria.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, but it's a criteria that would need discussion.
Right. Okay. And so then, in the implementation of a well standard, if you were wanting to do that, who would you go to get that clarification? Thank you, Julie. Can you just shout it out? I'm sorry, I'm being dumb.
I'm pretty sure the Graham Crosswalk has covered that, and you can use the NR ones. They're very, very similar, so that's been sorted.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are very similar.
Alan's nodding. Okay. All right.
You always use.
Great. Thank you for answering that.
Lovely.
Brilliant. Okay.
Thank you.
Excellent.